There I was, 6 years old, standing in my grandparents' living room, watching my grandfather dance the silliest dance ever, right there on the coffee table. Because that man would do just about anything to put a smile on my face. He truly was my biggest fan, my number one cheerleader, and my champion. So when he passed away, my first year in college, my grandmother took over as the number one fan, the cheerleader, and the champion. See, my grandfather only had a 6th grade education, and my grandmother a high school diploma. So as a first-generation college student, one of my greatest accomplishments was graduating my master's program with honors. As I stood there on the graduation stage with my golden yellow honors tassels hanging from my neck, as I bowed my head to receive my honors hood, I looked up out into the audience, making eye contact with my grandmother, who was smiling, and with a single tear coming down her cheek. It was right then, in that very moment on that graduation stage, that I realized this was way more than just my accomplishment. This was the accomplishment of my entire family. Fast forward just a few years later, and I find myself married, moving 1,500 miles cross-country as my husband had accepted a new job. It was then he encouraged me to quit my career in social service of nearly 10 years to pursue my passion in television and podcasting full-time. It was the first time in our relationship that he would be the primary income earner. It was only a year later when I found myself heartbroken and devastated, when I discovered he was not only cheating on me, but he was accumulating excessive debt without my knowledge. The very credit cards that he insisted I use to pay for everything, he was using to control and manipulate my spending and literally track my physical location at all times. When I confronted him, he punished me. Yeah. He shut off all the credit cards. He closed every bank account I had access to, and maliciously turned off my cell phone service. I was 1,500 miles away from all friends and family when I was estranged and abandoned by my own husband with only $37 in my bank account in Los Angeles, California. He threatened me and said, things would be bad for me if I didn't do what he said. Those first few days of separation, I realized there were words for what was happening to me. The years of emotional degrading, the infidelity, was emotional abuse. And the controlling and tracking my spending and the accumulation of excessive debt without my knowledge was financial abuse. It didn't take long for reality to sink in that not only was my marriage over, but I was in really, really big trouble. I needed help. The most difficult kind of help to ask for. Financial help. But who could I trust with my devastation, my heartbreak, my shame, my guilt? It takes a particular kind of courage and vulnerability to ask for that kind of help. And I had to do it. I had to make that really hard, embarrassing call to my mother and my best friends to tell them the truth about what was happening and the severity of the situation. And thankfully, they came immediately to my aid. But how did I do that? How, in my lowest, darkest, most embarrassing moment, did I ask for help See, as a therapist and as a helper, I needed to know, like, how did I do it? Maybe I could teach others, maybe I could gain deeper insight to myself. And I realized, after years of other adversity, I had practiced vulnerability. I had built trust. I had confided in friends and my mother before, and thus created a pretty fierce support system. So was that it? Practicing vulnerability. Yeah. I became a little obsessed with the idea and the concept. And it turns out, thankfully, that I'm not the only one who has discovered that we can practice vulnerability as a strength and not as a weakness. Researcher and storyteller Brene Brown has spent nearly 20 years of her career researching those very concepts: courage, shame, and vulnerability. And she's come up with some pretty fascinating conclusions. One being that courage and compassion allows us to embrace vulnerability. Also, that vulnerability is actually required for us to fully access joy and meaningful relationships. Also, that one of the core components of vulnerability is courage. Yeah, you might be afraid or uncomfortable, but courage allows us to access the greatest reward of vulnerability, which is building healthier and stronger relationships and better communities. So, did I do that? I had practiced vulnerability, built trust, and a real strong support system, which thankfully allowed me to go on and escape my abuse and build a thriving private practice, be a licensed therapist, be on multiple podcast and television appearances, and yes, I've helped over 3,000 clients throughout my career, helping people escape infidelity and financial abuse and other trauma. All because I practiced vulnerability? Good news is, Dr. Taryn Marie has also studied resilience and vulnerability. And what she concluded is that practicing vulnerability is actually one of the top 5 characteristics of highly resilient people. That vulnerability is actually an openness versus a closed or weakness. She also concluded that vulnerability is required for us to have transparency and authentic life. Well, the good news is we all can practice vulnerability. By doing so, not only can we save thousands of people from abuse, but we can build stronger, better relationships and communities. Yeah, by practicing vulnerability, by sharing your opposing views, your goals, maybe even your fears with those you trust. By doing so, you start to build trust and nurture a healthier support system. So here's what I want you to do today. I want you to identify your greatest aspiration, your goal, or maybe an unmet desire, and share it with someone you trust. Yeah, it's that easy. Your greatest desire, unmet goal, or like an unmet desire with someone you trust. By doing so, you will be building trust with that person, and again, you'll be on the road to nurturing stronger and better relationships and a support system. Dr. Taryn Marie, Brene Brown, and myself agree with Bob West, who said this: vulnerability is not inherently a strength or a weakness, but a characteristic that is strengthened with use. Like our muscles, when we work out in the gym regularly, by practicing vulnerability in a safe space, you can strengthen that characteristic. So I want all of us to start flexing our vulnerability muscles. Thank you.